Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode number 91 of the HaskinCast Podcast, coming to you from beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada, where it is actually very cold here today as I'm recording this, but it is still beautiful, and we probably have more lights on the strip than we did yesterday. That seems to be a common theme every time I go down there, which is about once a week these days. It seems like there's some new sign up, some, light bulbs have been brightened or replaced or whatever. And, you wonder how bright something can actually get, but we seem to be trying to peak that as much as possible. I have a very interesting guest, author Lily Lamb, on the show today, and she is coming to us all the way from Perth, Australia. Fortunately, she is not in an area that is affected by the fires at the moment, and I'm hoping that everything gets resolved down there very quickly, and that we save as much of the land as possible. They've had enough problems down there with the diminishing of the Great Barrier Reef and everything else that's gone on. So hopefully things will stop, and they can get back to regeneration and growth and all those wonderful things that are part of what makes Australia such a beautiful place. I've never been there myself, but I can tell you that everyone that I've met from Australia has treated me very kindly. I've known quite a few people from there, and I don't know how they handle the flight going there and back, because that is incredibly long here from here. But they do it, and it's a beautiful place. And of course, the American vision of Australia that we see through social media is that yes, it's beautiful, and everything wants to eat you. And that's probably true. And it was people from Australia that showed me that video. I don't know if they just don't want me to go. Anyway, but she's coming to us from Australia. She's actually from Turkey, so her accent is not Australian, but she's very intelligent, very brilliant, and very passionate about what she does. I love her approach and her outlook, and we're going to get into all of that in the interview. But first, of course, we have to talk about what's going on here, which is not a lot. It's the beginning of the year, which means it's time to do all the year-end corporate paperwork stuff, which I am almost done with, well ahead of my tax appointment at the end of February. I'm just waiting for, all the final, W-2s from projects and all that stuff to come in, all the sales figures and all that, because I don't get those a lot of times till early to mid-February. But I'm just about done with all the stuff that I can do here on my end, and I'm very happy about that, because it is almost time for me to head to the beach for my one day off a year that I take. And that is 100% on me, because I could take any day off I want. But I love what I do so much that I don't really feel like it's work. There's parts of it that are work, like the scheduling of the guests for the podcast, all the editing and stuff, the paperwork with the social media and the taxes and all that for the music side of things. But the creative part of it and the interview part of it, I absolutely love. So none of that seems like work. But I'll be heading to California for my one day at the beach, and then headed to the NAMM show. So I will be there on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and then headed back on Monday. So if you guys are going to be at the NAMM show, shoot me an email at scott@scotthaskin.com. Or you can, hit me up on Facebook or Twitter or any other of those places that I'm at. And let's get together. Let's grab a cup of coffee or something, although the line is usually a mile long. We can always step outside, have a chat, or find a quiet corner to talk. The NAMM show is great. I'm looking forward to it. I plan on doing a NAMM recap when I come back, although I have another idea that I'm working on scheduling with a guest, so we'll see how that pans out. But I'm definitely looking forward to it. It'll be great to see my friends again from all over the world. Friends like Eduardo and Wolfgang, and that I know from Best Service. Eduardo was on the show not too long ago talking about Era 2. And I'm looking forward to his unveiling of this year's new VST, which I am incredibly excited about. And we'll talk about that after the presentation at the NAMM show. I have a lot of people to visit out there, a lot of people to meet up with, and a lot of people to connect with while I'm there. Of course, my friends at Audionamics, I will definitely be dropping by and saying hello. My friends at Cakewalk by BandLab, which supply basically the foundation of the podcast, which is the Cakewalk program, which I use to record the podcast in and edit it, as well as, clean up the majority of the sounds. And then there's the offshoots like Isotope RX and Levelator, which I use to bring it to the broadcast level of volume. So there's people I want to see. I want to visit my friends at MoTooth and talk to them about this wonderful new audio interface that I added to the studio this year called the M4, which is a 4-channel audio plus 2-channel MIDI interface, and the sound on it I just absolutely love. It is crystal clear, and again, the show quality depends on the apparatus that my guest is calling in from. So if they're calling in from a landline or a cell phone or through Facebook, everything sounds different, and there's only so much I can do to control that. If I had the time, I could probably make every one of them pristine, but I don't. So, or as pristine as possible, but I don't. So I give you the best quality that I can with each one. With this episode with Lily, we decided to try the Facebook call feature, which for the most part is pretty good. And especially considering that she is literally on the other side of the world in a different hemisphere. The quality, I think, came out really good. We did have a couple of issues where the app started dropping out a little bit, and it gets a little distorted and the sound kind of drops in volume. So I edited that. You might notice a couple of like weird edits. You may not notice them at all. I tried to do them as smoothly as possible, but that could be those two. They're around the 40 and 47 minute mark, I think. But other than that, I thought the call feature was pretty good. I've had problems with it when I've been a guest on other shows and they've used that. We've had problems with it dropping out. Of course, one of those was in the middle of a huge storm. So I can't necessarily blame the app for that. It could have been their connection to the internet through their phone. So, but yeah, it was a good call, really good quality. Had a wonderful conversation with Lily that I'm very excited to bring you as we hit one more podcast on the way to the first milestone of episode 100, which if I'm scheduling it right, it looks like it's going to be around the end of February, early March. But I've got a couple of extra episodes that I've scheduled that'll be hitting on Saturdays. So if those pan out time and schedule wise, then we may be hitting the 100th episode a little bit earlier. I'm really excited to do it. I'm actually recording it this week. So yeah, it's going to be fun. And without any further ado, let's talk to Lily Lamb in Perth, Australia. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome my lovely, lovely friend on the other side of the pond in coming to you from Perth, Australia, which I think is the farthest away podcast I've done so far. Lily Lamb, the author herself. Lily, how are you today?
Very well, thank you. How about you, Scott?
I'm doing great, thank you. I am so excited to talk to you, and I really appreciate you taking some time. I know that things are a little crazy in Australia with the fires right now, but I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you very much for thinking of me and giving me the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Well, certainly. Let's start off with, why don't you tell us a little bit about the kind of stories that you write, because you're a very niche author.
Well, I write different genres, partly because I get influenced by the news and events that happens in social media, and I start writing. So I write gay romance. I also write gothic horror, but generally, again, around gay romance areas. Yeah, horrors and romance, and a bit thriller.
Well, that's certainly an interesting combination. There are not a lot of authors that write that specifically, are there?
No, I don't think so. I think it's my upbringing too. As a child, I used to read Gothic stories a lot, and so I got really influenced by my, I think, cultural background, what I was encouraged to read. Yeah.
Sure, yeah. Was this something that just came about naturally, that's where your writing headed, or was this something that you'd always wanted to write in this style?
Look, it happened really in its own course. I don't know. I never thought I would be a writer because, as you may have noticed, English is not my first language. And I learned the language by myself. I didn't formally study. So writing itself was a surprise. And then the more I wrote, the more I noticed the characters I pick, they have their own ideas. Whether I start with a certain plot in my head, But as I start writing, the story starts evolving and changing, and I find myself writing gothic horror and fantasy.
I like that though, because when you're doing it that way, things come out really organically, and I think it makes for a better story. If you sit down and you're trying to plan this or that, you can kind of lock yourself into corners. But if you're just writing naturally, then I think the story comes out better for it.
I think so too. And ultimately, I'm writing it for the pleasure of it, to inspire readers and challenge myself. So I don't want to write in a certain way, following a certain formula. I just am writing because I'm an indie writer,
Mhm.
and I want people to see it's something different.
Sure. Are you the kind of artist like I am where no matter how many people buy the product, it's almost to an extent irrelevant. I just going to keep writing because I love writing. I can't see myself not doing it.
Exactly, exactly. I am not writing for the fame of it or money of it because let's put it this way, it's not going to pay for my livelihood. I write it purely because I have a story to tell, and each story has a little bit of element of myself in it. So I am writing for others to know something that's happening to other people, other societies or cultures.
Sure. I like that. I like that. And you've been writing for quite a while though, haven't you?
Since 2015.
Okay, so you
So,
started a little bit later in life. What was the impetus that made you say, you know what, I'm going to do this?
well, I used to review stories and I used to write my reviews and all that. And then a few times authors asked me whether I would be their beta readers. And then as I was reading stories, I started getting some ideas like I have a story to write. I have a story to tell others. And that was about domestic violence. Romance story, but domestic violence is a big part of that story.
Hmm.
And I started writing it. And of course, it was full of challenges because, as I said, English is not my first language.
Hmm.
And I struggled a lot, but I finished the story and released it. And that was my bestseller.
Wow. I love that.
Yeah.
But see, that's what I mean. When
Yeah.
you write organically and you're writing from, that place of just not trying to do anything, just letting it pour
Yeah.
out, it comes out the best. Now, you said that English is not your first language. Your first language again is
Turkish.
Turkish. Did you also write a version of it in Turkish, or would it not translate well?
It doesn't translate well. I'll be honest with you, I'm in no man's land when it comes to languages. I left Turkey 30 years ago, and my husband is Australian. I don't have any Turkish person close to me to socialize, so my Turkish is broken.
Sure.
And my English is not that doing great either, I think. So I can't write in Turkish.
I think you're doing great in English, though.
Oh, thank you. I am studying all the time, I must say. I'm learning through YouTube. I borrow books from the libraries. My
Mhm.
husband is helping me to improve my grammar. So I am improving. Work in
Sure.
progress.
Well, yeah, and just the sheer habit of writing and through the editing process, a lot of times you find out
Yeah.
things that you could phrase a little bit better or whatnot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I read a lot. I read a lot. Reading books are my best friends. So I always read to learn, improve myself, and be in awe of authors who write some amazing stories.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, do you find that it's hard for you to find things that you can then read and enjoy because of that barrier?
No, I don't, because from my perspective, writing a story is a quite a torturous process.
Oh,
I'll be
wow.
honest with you. It is torturous because, in your head, you think you're writing something so fantastic, and then you start reading it yourself. You think, oh no, nobody's going to read this. It's a lot of work to write a story.
Yes.
So I appreciate every author's efforts. I mean, some books I can't read because it's so different from what I like to read. But again, I respect the author's attempts, and I'll read the stories and I'll review the stories.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I do find it when I've edited books that take place in other countries, like it might start off in the United States, but then they'll have to go to Italy or France or somewhere.
Yeah,
And when the author starts changing the language, or like Dan Brown, I love Dan Brown's books, but there's so many
yeah.
things in his books that I have to just mentally go, okay, I don't know what that means, but it's not important enough for me to look it up. And it kind of does draw back from the story because I don't have that skill set.
Exactly. I mean, I'm a big fan of Graham Masterton. I think he writes awesome supernatural horror. When I read his books in English, I am just living in the pages. At night I can't even walk to ladies. I can't go to kitchen to make coffee because I'm so scared. But if I read those books in Turkish, it doesn't have the same effect.
That's interesting.
It doesn't have the same effect because the vocabulary in Turkish is not that rich. So it loses that extra scary impact on the pages.
Right. Well, yeah, and I think even sometimes, like I've noticed, if you were to write comedy, comedy does not translate around the globe very well because a lot of it is so specific to the area that you live in, what's going on
Yeah,
in that culture at that time, and
yeah.
because everybody in the world is going through their own things in their own culture, it doesn't really translate.
Exactly, exactly. Turkish humor is quite slapstick, It's a quite a innocent humor. It's not like English humor where there's sarcasm, there's black humor.
Mhm.
Americans are different, although similar to I think Turkish humor. Hence, we love American comedies. But writing it is again and showing the scene is quite hard. And I wrote one gay romance. It had a lot of funny parts.
Mhm.
It was about this Turkish twink who is almost virgin, almost, but not totally.
Right.
And writing from his socially awkward Turkish perspective was really hard because I wanted the English reader. Most of my readers are from America. I wanted the Americans to see the struggles of a Turkish person in another country and cultural clashes and all that. And it was quite hard, but I really tried hard for others to see from someone who is not a white or English and their struggles.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it is a lot of work.
Oh, sure. I think too, it's interesting the perspective that we have in the United States. I think we tend to think that everybody is interested in what we're doing and that we can just sell all over the world. And I don't necessarily know that's the case, but I find it interesting that the United States is a target market for you because that's where you're most comfortable writing.
Yeah, and look, 99% of my sales happen in America, and I am grateful to USA readers for that. And I tend to read and watch USA products. I just like it, and I think I'm not the only one. In Japanese, people also love, USA products, and the same for Turks. In certain cultures, appeals to us.
Right.
So I try to write in American English. And when I'm living in Australia, my writing in my nursing pages, I'm a nurse in daytime. Um, it's all American English, and my colleagues say, "Oh, have you lived in America?" No. I said, "But your grammar, your words are American English." Why? I said, it must be because of my readers. I am focusing on American English.
Right.
So in Australia, I'm writing in American English
How
or
different is
trying to.
well, sure. How different is the dialect in Australia? Because they speak English in Australia, but there's a difference between Australian English and American English.
There is the letters. You tend to use Z in your words, and whereas Australians are very much like the English, and they'll use the S in certain words.
Oh.
The humor is different. And also the phrases, Australian phrases are only unique to Australia. And when I used it in one of the stories, Americans didn't understand that. And so I had to change my thinking and read more American authors to understand. so that the American readers are happier with my work, because you guys are the ones who like my books. Thank you.
Right. Well, I'm happy that we do. Now, the newest book that you have out in the fantasy is called Set in Stone. And what can you tell us, without giving away too much, because obviously you want people to read it, but what can you tell us about this one?
Well, that story for a long time was in my head. When I was a child, my father took me to a place called Cappadocia in Turkey. And Cappadocia, there is a tiny little area in Cappadocia called Fairy Chimneys. The story setting is there, actually. They are the oldest buildings formed through this massive, big volcano eruption. And what happened, this is about 12 BC, people actually dug into these caves and they created homes. And some of them are under the ground as well. And when I went there as a child, I thought I was in fairyland. Seriously, it's just, I've never seen any place like that. People living there. And every time I walk from one structure to another, I thought there is a fairy following me. So here I am in my 50s. I wrote a story. And in that area, there is wild mountain goat, and they are quite threatened species because hunters are just relentless. These creatures have got half a meter long, huge, what is it?
Like a tusk?
Horns. Yeah, horns. Sorry.
Sure.
And they are hunting these poor things, and they're almost extinct. So I wanted to highlight their plight and make my dreams come true, that there is a life, that we've never encountered. And I wanted the readers to believe that. So the setting place is Fairy Chimneys in Cappadocia, about a shifter who is a wild mountain goat. And then I thought, hang on a sec, this is a world I am creating. I need to make it believe. So I add a little bit Greek mythology, because around that time in Cappadocia, people did believe in Greek mythology. They did believe in Cybele, who is the Mother Earth for Cappadocia. So I added a little bit of her. And then I thought, hang on a sec, why stop here since I am stretching everything? And I brought a gargoyle.
That's a nice twist.
I know. I just love the concept that if I could create a world that is convincing and the reader is lost in it. And that's what I tried.
Yeah.
And so I hope people will like it.
I'm sure they will. And, I've always said that I'm willing to go along with you in any world that you want to take me in. I grew up in the Star Wars generation. So when I was a kid and I went to the movie theater, I just accepted everything that was happening on the screen. I didn't think about, well, the ships can't fly that way because of gravity and they don't have enough propulsion and this planet can't exist. Like, none of that entered my head. I'm willing to take that journey with you. As long as the world within that makes sense, then I'll go anywhere with you want to go.
Exactly. I remember I was like 5 or 6 years old when I first time watched Star Trek. Mm-hmm. I thought it was real. I was in awe of that program. And so I hope that I was able to convince the readers about living in Cappadocia, in this magical place.
Sure. I have no doubt that you are. And you said that there's the word I think that you used was it emprig?
Yes.
Yes. So tell our audience what that means, because that's a very interesting twist in your story.
Yes, there is a new concept in LGBT stories, empregs, where in these fantasy stories, males can have children. And so I wanted to write an empreg story to show whether is it possible, and I think it is possible. Anything is possible in fantasy world. So one of my characters will have children I'm not going to tell you how, because that's where the twist is.
Uh-huh.
It's not like how readers imagine, but yes, my characters will have babies.
That is going to be interesting for sure. That's what I love
Yeah,
about the fantasy world, though, is that you can really just put in anything that you want as long as it works within the concept of that world. You could do anything.
exactly. It's amazing. I am in awe of anyone who could write fantasy and horror. I think both genres are pure, imagination.
Mhm.
And anyone who could write a different story and can convince me to live in their pages, I am in awe of them. So I tried my best, and I hope I am close to those authors who convince me that there is a world out there that is beyond imagination.
Oh, yeah. And I think that we've proven historically that we'll buy into that. I mean, you can go back to the days of shows like The Twilight Zone, Gilligan's Island, Battlestar
Oh,
Galactica,
yeah.
and we're willing to accept those things because I think we as humans, especially nowadays, I think life is so stressful that we want that
Yeah.
escape. We want to know that there's some other world out there that we could go to whenever we want.
Yes, and it has a happy end, because in real life living, look what's happening. People are dying. There is war. There is famine. There is fires everywhere. And we want to escape somewhere that the bad is punished, and there's a happy end.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a big part of it. And while personally, I get tired of knowing that everything's going to end up okay in a story. Sometimes I just
Yeah,
want to know that maybe it's not. I want a little bit of stakes in the read, But
exactly.
yeah, but I think for most people, though, I think they want that. They want everything tied up into a nice little bow. They want to know that there's a world where everything's going to be okay, because in real life, it isn't always the case.
Yeah, and in my stories, everything is gonna be okay, but not really. I must say, I just want to highlight, because um, I try in at the very base of it, I write about mental health issues. I write about social issues like homelessness, domestic violence, racism. So when I touch these topics in the stories, the end is happy, but it's going to keep happening again and again. Life is not that perfect. And while I want the readers to escape into fantasy, I also want them to think about um, what's happening in real life too. I don't want us to bury our head in
Right.
the sand. So in this story, it was about racism. It was about being anti-LGBT and all that. So whilst there is happy end, it's a bittersweet happy end.
Right.
Am
Well,
I giving too much away?
no, I
I
don't think
hope
so.
not.
But I really like the fact that you're not afraid to bring those elements into the book, because I think there's the kind of reader that, and I'm kind of both kinds, but there's the kind of reader that just wants to not think about anything in the real world. Just give me
Yeah,
something to get me out of this. And then
yeah,
there's that, okay, but let's make this realistic and say, well, this is how it is, but here's what we can do, or here's a different way to approach it, or a different way to look at it. And
exactly.
I don't mind when writers bring that in, but I think a lot of writers are afraid to.
Yes, I don't want to be afraid, because I was a domestic violence victim. Yes, at one stage in my life I was homeless too, and I went through a lot of difficulties, and all these experiences shaped me into what I am today. And if I didn't honor my survival and those who were around me, I would be a ungrateful person.
Mhm.
That's how I feel. I would not be grateful to the universe who rescued me from some awful situations. There is nothing fun about being homeless.
No.
And it's best not to forget the homeless. It is not fair. So in my stories I will mention these awful situations. And yes, it challenges some of the readers, and I respect that. But as a person who went through all these experiences, I cannot shy away. I have to remind people of those who are struggling outside.
Well, first of all, congratulations to you for getting out of both of those situations, because I think
Thank
those
you.
are, well, they're really defining moments for people. I think there's the people that want to get out and don't know how. There's the people that are
Yeah,
just willing to go, well, you know what, this is what my life is meant to be, and they accept it. And then there's the people that fight and fight until they find a way out. And obviously you have found a way out, whereas a lot of people don't. So I'm very glad that you are no longer
thank
in
you.
either of those situations, because those are terrible.
No. Yeah, and that's why I think I became mental health nurse and therapist. I want to help others. There is a way out there. I wouldn't like anyone to think they're on their own, totally abandoned.
Yeah.
It's not true. I hope. Look, I was on the street literally hiding, and someone helped me. And I want to pay back, and I want to help others who need help.
And that's the way that the world should work. I think, not that you have to go through something to want to help someone else, but we should all be working together to get people to at
Absolutely.
least living a tolerable life.
Absolutely, absolutely. So look, I deal with suicidality. I've got patients who want to end their lives, etc., etc. So I was one of them. So yeah, I need to write their stories.
Do you find it difficult, having been in those situations yourself? Obviously, there's the desire to want to help people, but do you find it difficult sometimes to be around that all the time?
Sometimes it is harrowing. Sometimes it does touch you. You know, I'm a human person, and I have feelings. I try not to suffer from compassion fatigue. Yes, sometimes it's hard, but that's what life is about.
Very
That's
true.
what life is about, and there's no point of hiding from reality, and not from my perspective, but look at life from others' perspective. If it's harrowing for me, it must be 10 times worse for them. So I cannot hide from them. I cannot ignore them. I need to help them. So at night, when I go to bed, I know I've done the right thing. My conscience is clear. I gave my best shot. That's how I operate.
That is such a beautiful outlook. I really love that. That's got to help sustain you from some of those tougher days.
Absolutely, absolutely. I can't hide from life, and in my stories, I try to give that message.
Mhm.
That we need to help others. Life is not about ourselves only. We are a tiny speck in universe. There's so much happening around us. We need to look at life from a different perspective.
Yeah. I think we all need to work together better too. I think
Absolutely.
especially with the isolation of social media. I was just listening to an interview today with somebody where they were talking about how we don't look up at the stars anymore because we're too busy looking down at whatever device is in our hand or texting somebody or waiting to get a message back.
Yeah.
We've really lost for the majority, I think, especially for the younger generations that have grown up utilizing this technology, where you and we came from a world before we had this, and we watched it
Yeah.
develop over the course of time. But for the kids that are born into this, it's nice to just look out a window once in a while and watch the rain fall, or just look up at the sky and see the stars, and when you can get away from the city lights.
Yeah, I mean, I get worried that we give so much to our children through, TVs and internet and all that. Everything is ready made, and I'm not so sure that we are helping children to be creative because they're now sitting and waiting to be entertained and visually. And I hate saying it, but back in my days, this is giving my age away. My parents used to give me a wooden spoon and a pot and a box, and I would create things out of it. And I never forget, I gave a bowl of popcorns to my son, and he was 4 years old. And this kid created an army from popcorns. Each one had a character, and I was marveled at his imagination. And then I made a mistake of introducing him to video games, and that was it.
Right. Yeah. But I think
No
that's
more
the thing.
popcorns.
I think that we are from what I've seen, and I interact with the world very little, but from what I've seen, it seems like we're losing that ability to be creative because we become dependent on the technology to do so much of it for us. And even in music now, there's computers that write music. So you have a person that'll edit it, but the computer can write it. So you can't really do that with books at this point. But I wouldn't be surprised if the artificial intelligence got to that point where you could just say, hey, you know what? I want a new story. I don't want to go pick out a book. Write me a science fiction, and the computer will just spit it out.
And it's highly possible. I mean, the other thing is audiobooks. I think audiobooks are fantastic for those who are visually impaired and all that. It's great. But a lot of people are now wanting audiobooks. So while they're driving, they are listening to it. But they are focusing so much on it, they're not really reading anymore.
Right.
And I think, but you gotta lick your finger and turn that paper page. You gotta finish the book a bit, and we are not now because ebooks are cheaper too. And I am one of them. I sell only ebooks because it's cheaper for the readers.
Sure.
But we are getting really carried away. I think, making everything so easy that we are forgetting the simple pleasures of turning a page or sniffing the paper and things like that. But saying that, Scott, I think we are, as human beings, are amazing creatures. We're so adaptable. There will always be some, despite all this ready-made entertainment, their imagination is going to beat all that, and they're going to leave us in all of them. You are one of them. You are one of them. I love listening to your music. And when I'm in the train, that's all I do. Sometimes, I have a really heavy day, distressing day, seeing people, succeeding in their suicide and etc., leaves you really shaken. And I'll listen to Vivaldi or you in the train. And before I meet my husband, I need to be okay, so he doesn't see my distresses. And I listen to your music or Vivaldi, Four Springs, and I'm okay then. I'm not
going to complain about that. That's a huge compliment.
Thank you.
Well, that's one of the things is that I want to be a part of making the world a better place. And obviously, we as artists, we want to do that through our art. And to know that something that I've created, I mean, people have given birth to my music, which was a huge compliment. And I had somebody tell me recently that they actually, because of my music, it helped them not commit suicide. That's what they use to kind of get through their day.
It is very soothing.
Well, but the point is that it's working, that it's making the world better, even on a one-on-one basis, and I never even thought about that as an application to just kind of calm you down from your workday.
Yeah, sometimes I get so distressed. I feel so alone, and I can't talk about it, my work, or look, I'm quite a quirky character. I'm not everybody's cup of tea, and I'm overly sensitive, and sometimes I'll take things to my heart.
Yeah.
And during that time, if I am listening to your music or Vivaldi, I feel connected to someone I've never met, that someone understood, human distress or aloneness or loneliness, and they created something so beautiful that it takes away their sense of loneliness or isolation.
Yeah.
And that's what you as a musician are doing it. And, so I'm glad that your music is helping others, not just me. It's fantastic. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you sharing that with me. And, that's the thing, too, is a lot of times people don't really tell the content creators how much they enjoy their work or how much it's meant to them. I wouldn't have found out some of those things had I not just casually reached out to people and just in conversation, they told me these things. So I love that. But you mentioned obviously being sensitive. And I think as artists, we tend to be. But if I remember right, you had posted something about something negative that somebody had said about your book. And I don't know what the feedback was, but it had obviously upset you.
Well, people they have the right to not like my books or any book, anything.
Sure.
And I respect that. But what hurt me was this reviewer, two sentence, didn't like it. And then she advised other people not to waste time with my book. And that part was very personal and it hurt me. It's one thing I don't like a book, is another thing telling people not to bother.
Right.
That's not a review. That's not a constructive review. It is, I felt that it was rather personal and spiteful. And it hurt me.
Right.
If she said, I hated this story, I didn't finish it, I'm giving 1 star, I say, okay, thank you. You at least put a review. And, I hear that. And I'll read my book again to see. But for her to say not to read my book to others was rather personal, I felt.
I
So I
agree.
was gutted.
Yeah, and I've had some guests and I have talked about this on the show before. I don't mind if somebody doesn't like something I create, that's fine. Art is very subjective, and
Yeah,
especially with a story, you're either going to connect with it or you're not. Or maybe you thought it
yeah,
was going to be a romance and maybe you're not into gay romance, and once you found that out,
yeah.
that turned you off, whatever it is. But if you're going to leave the feedback, at least say, you know what, this wasn't my kind of story. Here's what I didn't like about it. So if that's not what you're into, then this might not be the book for you. However,
That's right.
and just if this is your kind of story. But the question I have these days is, because people are so loose with their feedback, do you think people actually read the ratings anymore? Do you think people take that to heart?
I think they do. I certainly do. When I am picking a book, I'll look at the overall rating. If it's like five, rating, and I don't take much seriously because only 5 people bother to put reviews. But if it's like, say, 500,000, whatever reviews overall, I'll take it into consideration overall. Saying that, I have deliberately picked books that was 1 star, 2 star, and I absolutely loved it. And that's the thing, as you said, it's about being subjective, isn't it? What didn't appeal to people? Their review was so constructive. It actually made me think. Actually, based on what this review said, I'm going to read this book, and I love
Well, yeah, that could be the enticing thing too. If I don't typically like the kind of stuff that everyone else does, then I'll probably like the stuff they don't.
Well, it's the art of writing review, isn't it? Like you say, when a genuine quality reviewer writes constructive review, you hear their point of view, but you also hear what they are talking about, and I think, okay, I'm going to give it a try.
Mhm.
And here I am, a big fan of Graham Masterton. I mean, what made me pick his book was some of the bad reviews. And then I thought, oh, I want to know what this is about. And I actually liked it. It was gruesome. I love gruesome supernatural horror.
Okay.
So that's it.
Well, see,
Yeah.
there is a big bone of contention for purveyors of art, because some people might like a movie like Halloween, where you kind of see things, but you really don't see anything, and
Yeah.
it's more of a thriller. And then some people might like a movie like Saw, where you see so much on the graphic side of things, where other people are like, I don't want to see it. If I know it happened, I'm good. So there's so many
Yeah.
different levels. But when you've done this, when you've purchased books that have low ratings, have you been able to go back and go, okay, I understand why they didn't like it?
I did. I did. I must say, I don't put bad reviews. I don't. I never put bad. I used to many, many years ago, but I learned a humble lesson as an author. So I don't put bad reviews. If I think a story is really like has flaws, I'll discreetly approach to the author and just let them know how I feel and whether they noticed it.
Mhm.
So I don't put bad reviews. If I have nothing nice to say, then I don't say anything at all. I'll just speak privately to the author. Otherwise, I'll just write on the books that I really like. And you know what? I read some books I really hated, but they were 5 star quality. just because I didn't like it doesn't mean that some books don't deserve that 5-star or 4-star because they are so beautifully written.
I love that you just said that, because that's it right there. And that's why I have why I don't typically bother to read reviews myself, although you've got me rethinking that. But because people, it's like social media. I have the forum to say whatever I want to say, so I'm just going to say it, and I don't care whether what the value of this review is. I'm just going to say whatever I want. But if you were to say, you know what, this, I didn't like the story, but the story is incredibly well written. The characters are lovable, or the villain is so hateable. You have to hate them, that it really made me feel emotional. Like, you could not like a book and still have good things to say about it that could attract somebody who would like that book.
That's right. I mean, some books leaves me really shaken, uncomfortable, because it's just too real for me. And I like to read to escape. So I don't like reading, these biographies or real life oriented fiction books and all that. But some of them, deserve the acknowledgement. They deserve the acknowledgement. So with pleasure, I will, review them and I'll promote them, even though it's not my cup of tea. But I don't say that. I won't even say that in the story. It's not fair to the author or the story. I will just focus on its commercial value, its language, its quality, and what the author is trying to tell.
I like that. And when I write a review along those lines, when I feel that, people need to check out this book, I'll start it off with, this isn't normally the kind of book I would enjoy. Or
exactly.
I didn't like the story for myself. However, I think there's a lot of people that would. Just something to clue them into the fact that just because I didn't like it doesn't mean it isn't for everybody.
Exactly. And that's just being a fair, honest, congruent reviewer. You don't just review the books you like. You read the books you're not comfortable with, but they deserve the acknowledgement, and that's what art is about. Being able to look at it subjectively, but write a review objectively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I'm so glad that you have that point of view. And I think that, I have to wonder how much schooling should change based on how much the world has changed. And maybe we should have classes in social media etiquette and, the thing, because the reviews can really be hurtful to an author. And you can have an independent author that puts their first book out, and maybe it's not the greatest book, but they're just getting started. And, they can learn a lot from the reviews, but if they just get beaten up, they'll probably never write another book.
Well, that happened to me for a few years. I couldn't bring myself to write romance, so I wrote the gothic horror stories. I was trolled, and this person privately used to send me really nasty messages about my stories, and they were quite personal. And it shook me to my core, and I couldn't write. And I pulled up all my stories from Amazon, and I just wrote horror stories. And even now, I'm writing romance now. The Set in Stone is my first one in years. I'm still, hesitant. I'm afraid of getting trolls again, and sometimes these trolls are they. I guess if if you have psychopathic or sociopathic tendencies, you pick up the little nuances about the person, and you are able to target those vulnerable spots. Is it working?
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's better. It just started to fade out, and
Yeah.
and just started getting really crackly. And I've only done a couple of podcasts that I've recorded over Facebook, but that's happened both times. So it seems like it's really good for about 40 minutes, and then it goes, I'm getting tired.
Probably Facebook is doing it. You talked enough. Finish it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But to get back to it, so you were saying before we had to reset the call, you were saying about how you do get hurt by these things. But I think if you can find a value in the feedback, if you can kind of categorize it and go, okay, I understand what this reader is saying, and I agree that that's something that maybe I went too far on, and I'll look at that in further books. Or you can say, well, I think that that particular reader, maybe this book just wasn't for them.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
you can find benefit in it, but just there are people that are just ruthless and rude and cutthroat for no reason whatsoever.
Exactly. Look, social media freed us all, for the good and for the bad.
Hmm.
And any artist, whether a musician or an author or a painter, and social media gave them the freedom to express themselves, which means for certain people it's a freedom to express themselves to satisfy their own needs, whether it's a sociopathic or psychopathic or narcissistic. So it's a double-edged sword. Is
Hmm.
this mean I shall stop writing or you shall stop creating music? No, we just keep doing what we believe is the right thing for us. And if anyone is becoming personal, hurtful, well, we need to pull our big pants. What's that word?
Your
Phrase.
big girl panties on.
That's it.
Yeah.
Just put that back on and you move forward. See, sometimes I do get confused with phrases.
Oh no, you're
You can
doing great.
imagine.
Your English is fine, by the way. I've had a wonderful time listening to you.
Thank you.
There's not anything that you said that I didn't understand. So no, you're doing great.
Thank you. Thank you. I
Uh,
do get nervous.
oh no, you're doing fine. Now, in your story, now, but I've had similar feedback. Like I might get feedback on a song where they don't like it, and I dig a little bit, and I find out, well, the violin was the main instrument in that song. And when they were a
Yeah.
child, they tried to learn violin, and they got frustrated, and they never became a musician. And there's a lot of times so many underlying factors, but all you get
Yeah.
is the end of the aggression of it.
Yeah. And by the way, I do love the violins in your game. I just want to clarify that it's so haunting. I just want to clarify that.
I think it's the most. I mean, the cello is very expressive, the viola, but there's something about the note range of a violin
Oh,
and the
it's
emotion that it can bring out. In fact, one of my all-time favorite pieces of music is Violin Romance Number 2 by Beethoven.
oh,
I just drift away with that piece.
mm. It's I just love violin and I'm not much into piano, but if it's a Moonlight Sonata, I will listen over and over. That's just
Oh,
there's
gorgeous!
something about
Yeah.
and then I'll just make my coffee, turn off the lights, sit in the garden, and just listen to either your music, Moonlight Sonata, or Albinoni.
Oh well, that sounds absolutely wonderful. Uh,
Yes, I'm very black and white in my favorites. I don't change. I'm very repetitive because I love the experience. I don't want to lose it.
Yeah, I used to, when I was younger, I used to like to explore a lot more than I do now. Now I'm like, I have very little time to just sit down and enjoy something. So if I'm going to take that time, I want to know it's going to work. And so I tend to go back to
Exactly.
those favorites. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm not adventurous. I don't want to be adventurous. I just want that comfort zone, the emotion. So I tend to listen or watch or read the same thing over and over and experience the pleasure as the first time I've done it.
I love
Yeah.
that. Now, you had mentioned that in this new book, Set in Stone, one of your characters is a mountain goat, and you are a vegetarian in real life. How much does that affect how you write?
A lot. A lot. Because if you read all of my books, none of them will eat meat. So I have so, so I have to create characters that shy away from meat eating, but I'm not promoting vegetarianism either, or say I'm not trying to say eating meat is bad. It's just for me, I don't want to eat meat, so I
Mhm.
try to write in a way that works for me.
You know, one of the things that I remember reading a long time ago was Bruce Lee, the martial artist. He did not drink in real life. And so none of his characters drank in the movie. So he had one scene where his character was drinking, and his character, much like him in real life, could not handle alcohol. And I think that when we're writing what's true to ourselves, we tend to write in a more honest and compelling way.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. For me, I need to be authentic. Although in my stories, my character might be a murderer, which I have one. It could be an evil spirit, all sorts of things. But at the core of them, they won't eat meat.
It's okay if you go and kill people as long as you don't eat a cow on the way home.
Basically, it sounds like that, doesn't it?
It
But
does, yeah.
yeah. It's a bit twisted, I know, I can see it. But yeah, so I chose the mountain goat, but purely because that animal is under threat. People are coming from Europe, America, other parts of Turkey there to hunt those poor things for their homes. And I think part of me identifies with the poor goat, having difficulties in life and trying to survive and overcome difficulties. And at the same time, I think, I understand hunting to eat because you need to eat for survival. I don't understand hunting for the beauty of the animal.
Right. Yeah, I've never understood that either.
Yeah, so and I don't mean to be political in this discussion. It's just, there are certain things that I don't want to. So I chose the mountain goat. In another story, I picked another under threat animal. So yeah, I like things like this. I just want readers to be aware of what's happening out there.
Right. And yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that there's things in life that we can understand and identify with, and there's things in life that we don't understand and don't identify with. And,
Yeah.
I think it's perfectly okay to discuss those things. But to me, one of the most fascinating things about a goat is the way that they climb. Watching some of them climb up these steep rock faces, and I don't know how they do that.
And this is the one of the breeds that can climb up the most steepest, sharpest edges, and the weather conditions are awful too, and they're fine.
Yeah,
they are absolutely so majestic to watch them, and I am in absolutely awe of these animals. And so, yeah. Do you know what? I want to mention one thing to you. Could I?
Yeah.
One of my story now. I wrote a story ages ago called The Nameless One. And it was, do you remember the genie in a bottle?
Oh,
the
sure.
story?
Yeah. Aladdin.
Yeah. Everybody is writing from Aladdin's perspective. So one night I thought, no, I'm not having this. I felt so sorry for this poor genie who's stuck in a bottle, is serving for people 3 wishes all the time. So I ended up writing that genie's story, what happened to him, and from his perspective to be in servitude, granting people's wishes at his own expense. And I cried when I was writing his story, and it's a fable. So I tried to write it in older style English, which was really hard for me, but I think I succeeded well. And I think the reason I brought that up, Scott, is because I guess I just wanted you to understand where I am coming from in life. I really, really notice the downtrodden side more so than the rich and the famous and the most beautiful.
Well, it's a very empathetic approach, right? You can identify with the emotional side of those that we're not hearing the story from. And with all these reboots of television shows and movies and things that we've seen in Hollywood over the last couple of decades, I've often said, instead of just rebooting it and telling the story again, why don't we try telling the story from the other perspective? So if you were to take like Star Trek, okay, instead of telling the side of the story from the Enterprise and how they're the good guys because that's the perspective that we're given. But if you were to see the story from the side of, say, the Klingons or one of the other races, the Borgs, you would not necessarily think that the crew of the Enterprise are the good guys.
Exactly. I read a dark romance. This is one of my other favorite. And in this romance, it was from the bad person's perspective. And how paranoid he was, how his suspicions stopped him seeking help professionally. So he went off the grid. and people I just assume he was dead. But in reality, this guy had a genuinely a mental health problem. He suffered from paranoid delusions, and hence he did what he did, and he was hiding from others. It was grueling. I cried my eyes out.
Wow.
But from his perspective, I understood the things he did, how he perceived life, and in the end, of course, he was forced to, hospital admission, etc., etc.
Sure.
His happy end was kind of happy, but not really, because he's never going to be recovering from his mental health problems. He'll always battle with paranoid delusions, but that doesn't mean he didn't deserve love.
That's very true.
And I just love these kind of stories, and the music. That doesn't really fit in the norm. It's different. It touches the very core of you.
Well, that's it. I think that so much that's mainstream is just designed to elicit certain feelings and really not think, and keep the bad person being bad and the good person being good. But I read one of the books from the movie series Friday the 13th. I think it was I want to say part 7. The book was given to me by my parents for Christmas one year. And I read the book, and you understood finally the perspective of Jason the killer. You understood why he killed people, why he really just wanted to be left alone, but they keep digging him up and they keep bringing him back to life. And he's like, I just want to be dead. So I have to kill everybody so that there'll be nobody to resurrect me and I can just enjoy being dead. But you people keep coming back and bringing me back to life, and I have to kill you so you'll quit doing it. And when you look at it from that perspective, it really kind of makes you feel then for the murderer who's supposed to be the bad guy. You're like, but you're kind of the victim in this too.
Exactly. He did, like Greta Garbo, he wanted to be left alone.
Right.
And he was.
Exactly.
And it's like, Hannibal Lecter.
Mm-hmm.
And he's such a charismatic murderer, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
But when you look at his background, you can see why he did the things he did.
Right.
He had so many childhood traumas that really broke the shreds of his sanity.
Yes.
And does that make him a good guy? No. Does that make him a pure evil? Yes. But it also helps the reader or the viewer to understand why this guy finally snapped and became such a monstrous creature.
Yes. You know what? I absolutely agree with that. And I think there's a difference between understanding and allowing. Like, I can understand why he became the way he did. I'm not allowing that to be okay.
Exactly.
But I get why it happened. And in real life, you could look at a guy like, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ed Gein, who was the inspiration for so many films. But the reason that he became the way he did was because of the religious and oppression from his mother. And the weird just way he was brought up made him become what he was. I will never excuse what he did, but at the same point, you understand why.
Exactly. We cannot excuse or forgive or allow people to do the things that really they do. But I think it's important that we understand why and how, so that we are extra careful with our young ones.
Right.
We are extra careful with the person who may be isolated, struggling to understand their mental health. And you, as a neighbor, we genuinely need to practice, I think, love your neighbor. It doesn't mean that you're going to be friends with them. It's just being aware of what's happening in your community to help someone before they snap.
Right.
That's how I look.
Exactly. And I think the word community has a lot to do with it, because if you look at most of these cases, from the ones that I've read anyway, they've always been fairly isolated, non-social. There's no one checking in on them to make sure that they're being raised okay or anything.
That's right. And if they are not okay, we need to do something about it. It could be, I don't know, jail. It could be a community sentence. It could be treatment. It could be fostering, but we need to do something. We cannot ignore what's happening in our community
Right.
because it has disastrous consequences. I really believe that. So for me is I practice love your neighbor in this way, just being aware of what's happening in my community, in my country, in the next door neighbor, or in other countries. We need to be aware because as human beings, we are social creatures. We cannot ignore others.
Right. And you certainly, from your profession, you see that on a daily basis because you get the end result of not taking care of these things up front.
Absolutely. I see the end result, catastrophic results. And that made me, shape me into what I am today.
Yeah.
Try to be aware of what's happening around me because when a human being suffers, it's not always going to be sad. It could be totally disastrous. So we got to help each other.
Right. And more likely when people see somebody that is going through something or somebody that they just get a feeling like, I don't want to be near that person. Like they're evil or there's something about them that I don't like. We tend to shy away from that kind of confrontation and just, somebody else will take care of that, or I'm sure it'll be fine, but I'm not going to get involved. And that never helps solve any kind of problem. But at the same point, I can understand if you're feeling like you're at risk, you shouldn't necessarily jump in and be the one to help if you feel that you're maybe not equipped to deal with it.
Yes, but alert authorities. And the authorities could be a doctor, could be ambulance, it could be police, could be anything. But you need to alert someone you think they can handle it. I certainly don't encourage anyone to be the heroes because that's not what I'm meaning.
Right.
I just mean if you're aware of something, let someone know. I mean, you've done your part. So many times we get calls about people that they notice their neighbor is not doing well or they haven't seen or something. And look, I with the police, I broke windows and climbed into the buildings, okay, with my arthritic hip, if I may say so.
Sure. You're right.
But we broke into buildings and we found people not dead, but they are catatonic. They were so unwell. They were catatonic, dehydrated, brink of death. And I am grateful to neighbors who said, I haven't seen this guy for a while. Yeah. And we found, people in catatonic states with depression is just crippled or schizophrenia, or unfortunately they died alone, So it's important to notice what's happening around you. I mean, and most of the time the crimes are resolved because of people's calls.
Right. I would rather make a phone call and be wrong than not make the phone call and find out I was right.
Exactly. I'll tell you a funny story.
Sure.
One night I woke up at 3, pop, pop, pop. Now in Australia is not like, USA. We don't have guns. This pop, pop, pop sounded like gun. I was shaken. I jumped out of the bed. I told my husband, we must call, no, I must get out of the house. I said, because, my nursing cap suddenly put on. And he grabbed me, you're not going out. I said, he could be dying, let me go. So I looked at the window. On the street, there is this dark something lying in the middle of the street. Oh my gosh, I was beside myself. I said, you gotta let me go, Michael. He said, no, you are not going. He literally held me. So I called the police, and police asked my address. I couldn't remember my own address. I was so shocked.
Sure.
I was crying. So in the end, the police came. They are going up and down around. And you know what was it? Somebody's car, what in the engine, something happened. So the engine made that pop, pop sound. I don't know what it is. And the thing I saw on the street was the shadow of a tree.
Oh. But you know what? But you cared enough as a citizen to not lock yourself in your house and go make sure everyone was okay,
Exactly.
That's really sweet.
Exactly. 3:30 police came, knock on the door. He asked me, where is this body? I said, it's over there. He said, ma'am, come with me, please. I'm coming, wearing my pajamas, shaking, blubbering mess, speaking in Turkish and English together because I'm in shock. And he said, do you see that, ma'am? It said shadow. Nobody died. He was so kind. He was so polite because he understood I genuinely meant, well. And although I made a big mistake. And then I grabbed this, the gentleman's hand. And in that moment, I threw away the nursing cap because I know it's a shadow. Suddenly the author cap came. Oh, he's got muscular hands. Oh my gosh, he's so handsome. He could be a character in my story.
Oh, there you go.
The human mind, we just flick from scene to scene. But
Right.
yeah, I've done my best as a neighbor. I called the police. Okay, I was wrong, but I meant it well. And they were not offended. They actually thanked me that I thought to call them rather than act or whatever.
Exactly.
So here
Yeah.
it is. We'll try our best.
Well, no, and I love that you did that, because I think a lot of people would just lock themselves in their home and maybe call 911 and say, "Hey, I heard something,"
Yeah.
and it would just end there. But aren't am I wrong in thinking that guns are banned in? Is it all of Australia?
Say it again, sorry.
That there are no guns allowed in Australia?
Yes, no guns. Well, some people will have guns with what you call. They need that permission.
Oh,
But but it's almost unheard. I've never heard anyone, and I've been living here 20 years. I've never heard anybody saying, "I have a gun."
yeah.
We don't have it. We just think the police has it, and certain professions. I suppose farmers may have it because they live in the middle of nowhere, and they've got dingoes and all that. I think they may have it, but that's all. I've never seen or heard nothing like that.
Yeah.
We don't have. Yeah.
Well, I mean, especially with the wildlife that you guys have, because Australia, of course, our perception in America of Australia is that everything wants to eat you.
Yeah.
Between the kangaroos and the dingoes and everything else.
They bounce away from you.
Right. Yeah. But it, it's even from a protection standpoint, I could understand it. But is it weird when you guys watch, say, a movie in America where there's a gunfight and you just see that that's a normal thing on the street? Does that seem awkward to you because it's so different there?
Um, no, I'm not. I am not like a politically correct kind of person. If it's how it is in your country, it is how it is in your country, and I'll watch the movie and get into the scene. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it is a foreign concept. I mean, I don't know what a gun shoots, or sounds like, and hence I got it confused between a, engine problem and a gun. And here you go.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, like when I watch old clips of like television from the 60s and the 70s where a guest would go on Johnny Carson and they would have a cigar or a cigarette and they're just sitting there smoking on the stage. And, of course, none of that happens now. And it just seems so out of place to me because that's not the world that I live in. So I thought it might be the same for you watching a movie take place, because the culture is so different, where guns are very common here and there. You don't even know what they sound like.
No, I don't. Yeah, and it's surreal, really. I I don't understand why there is need to have guns, but then it's cultural, and in your culture there is a different way of looking at life, and I respect that. But honestly, I wouldn't know how to hold a gun. I don't know what it feels like. Are they heavy? Are they heavy? I don't know. They look like plastics, but I'm sure they are not. Are they plastic?
There are some, I think, that are, but most of them are metal, or I think that there's some that are, I want to say, fiberglass. I think some of the Glocks are fiberglass. I really don't know that much about them, to be honest.
I
I've
don't
never
either.
fired one.
But,
Yeah,
in Turkey, there are people who have guns in Turkey.
Oh, okay.
And in Turkey, uh, as you know, my country is going through some upheaval all the time. So there are guns there. But again, I haven't seen it. My dad has one, but I've never seen it. He always kept it in a safe, and when I think from time to time he used to clean it, but he always made sure we were not around and that the door was closed. So we know he has one, but we don't know what it looks like.
Wow. That's good, though. I like that he segregated you from that.
Oh yeah, we've never seen it. He just kept it in case, but that thing never happened. So probably it's rusted now. My dad is in his 80s. I doubt he can clean the a gun because he's got shaky hands. So it's probably like spider webs growing inside and
Right.
clouds
Yeah.
coming all over it.
Yeah. Well, before I let you go, tell us, so what are you working on now? Have you started a new one yet, or are you in
Yes,
between?
I do. I am writing a dark romance this time. I'm
Oh,
writing from the perspective of the baddie. And some it's about erotomania, which is the other meaning is stalking.
okay.
Uh, so from a stalker's point of view, I'm writing how he feels misunderstood by the object of his desire. And so I thought, no, I'm going to write this story. And I don't know the end. I don't know whether it's going to be a horror because he's a very headstrong person. He's not conforming to my ideas. So I'm writing
Oh.
his story. Let's see where it goes.
Well,
Yeah.
but I like that. And again, that'll be that organic sort of storytelling that'll be more compelling
Yeah.
to read. But well, if that's going to be your story, then I got to tell you a quick story.
Go on.
Some years ago, I was working at a music store, and I met this lady who worked for one of our vendors, and she was telling me that this guy that she went on a couple of dates with started just showing up at her house. He would be hiding behind the bushes. He would call her after she got home and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" "Well, I think you just got home." I mean, like real stalking. And she ended up filing a restraining order and all that good stuff. But I went out to lunch with her one day when she was telling me about this. And on the way home, I thought, okay, but I get that he's obsessed with her. I get that he's missing some sort of social skill of how to deal with this properly. But I try to think about what is it from his perspective? What is uh, where does he think this is going to get him by treating someone this way? And so I ended up writing a song about it called Through the Eyes of a Stalker, which
Oh
will
my
be
God.
released sometime this year. But it was basically about that same thing. It was like trying to understand through their perspective of that being okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Because someone with those qualities are truly, in my opinion, broken, damaged.
Oh, sure.
They've got a lot of issues. Is it treatable? Not really. You need to. We work with people who are stalkers. You can't really discharge them because it's delusional.
Right.
But from their perspective, it's interesting to look at life.
It is.
Just because someone is bad or we perceive them as bad doesn't mean we shouldn't see from their perspective how life feels like. And also, it prepares you to be more careful.
Well, and you can't fix a problem if you don't understand the problem, right? So unless you understand why he
Exactly.
thinks hiding in her bush is going to make her happy, hey, I was hiding in the bush for
Or
2 hours waiting for you
romantic.
to get home. Yeah. Why they think that that's a good thing. Like you can't treat that behavior unless you understand why they think it's right.
Yeah, and they can't see anything wrong with that behavior. And you got to understand that. So tell me, when are you going to release this music, this song?
Well, I hadn't even thought about it until you mentioned your story. I'll have to put that on my list to do maybe in February.
Oh, very good. Because I'm hoping to release mine in February, but I'm going to wait for you first
Oh,
because I
okay.
want to listen to see whether it will inspire me to enrich the story. So I'm going to
Ah.
wait for your story because I do listen to your work when I'm writing, but for certain scenes and all that. It kind of feeds my muse.
Mhm.
So I'm going to wait for your release.
Oh, well, I
Please
I will I
make
will
sure you
definitely,
tag me.
yeah, I'll definitely let you know when it happens, and I'll make that one a priority then.
Yes, please, because I don't know why, but I really think your music is not just for the individual ear, but it's perfect for films too.
Well, thank you. I have done a number of film scores over the years, and I've gotten away
Yeah,
from it in the last couple of years. But because I'm kind of at the point where if the film doesn't really talk to me, then I don't really think I'm the right person to do it. And there's other things I could do with my
exactly.
time.
Exactly. So, which film spoke to you and brought out the best in you? Can I ask before we go?
Oh, that's a good question. A lot of the films that I did, I worked a lot of film challenges. So they're ones where you just, okay, you get the story and you have to start writing.
Yeah.
But there was one that unfortunately the director decided never to release it. It was about, it was a very personal story that she wrote where she and her husband, they had just gotten married. They were going off to their honeymoon. They got in a horrible car accident. And he ended up in a facility where he had to be watched like all the time because he wasn't really mentally there. And she would come and visit him. And so in this film, she came and visited him at Christmas. And you really, it opens with her coming to visit him. So you have to piece together sort of what's happened as the film goes on. But she just didn't feel that it really was the right film for her to release. I guess she wasn't happy with the final product. And it makes me so sad because I thought it was a beautiful film and I was on set. I helped her film it. And even just standing there, being in the room with the actors and holding the boom mic, the emotion in the room was so intense that I couldn't watch them act. I had to just look at the wall and hope that they would hurry up and get this take right because it was just too overpowering. So when I got the edited version and I went to write the music, it was very challenging because I was afraid that the music wouldn't convey the depth of the emotion that I felt in that room.
Mm-hmm. So did you really?
Well, in the end, I was very proud of the music, and I thought that the film was beautiful. And then she decided not to release it, and I was very sad because I think it's some of my best work, but I think it's some of the best work that I've done to picture. And I think it's a film that people would really connect with if they saw it. But who knows? Hopefully she'll change her mind and put it out there one day.
So did you release the music yourself or are you waiting?
I'm waiting to see if she puts the film out.
Look, I understand where she's coming from. Traumatic brain injuries are horrendous because for the, relative's point of view, the body is there.
Yeah.
It's still there, but the personality functioning is totally changed. And it's quite traumatic to watch a relative trying to come to terms with that their loved one is right in front of their very eyes. But the brain injury changed the personality structure and also their functioning ability.
Right.
It is like a living nightmare for them. It is a living nightmare from a nursing point of view. Imagine when you are sleeping with that person day after day, you brought up children with them and they have an accident.
Oh, yeah. And the smallest I can relate to that is when my grandfather had a very severe heart attack and a triple bypass. And I drove, he lived in a different state, but I drove out there to help my grandma out. And I went to visit him in the hospital. And the first day I was there was, I think, a day after the bypass. And, of course, a heart attack can have a major impact on the brain because of the oxygen cut. And he thought that my grandmother was the warden of a prison and that I was a prison guard and that I was there to make sure that he didn't get away. And I mean, I'm looking at my grandfather and you can't reason with him. You can't say, Grandpa, it's me. Don't you remember when we went on vacation and we did this and we did that? Because they're not there in that moment. And that's a hard thing to watch when the expectation is temporary. But when you know that that's it, that's what the rest of their life is, that's another level altogether.
Absolutely. So I understand where she's coming from. I understand where you're coming from. And I can only wish her all the best and her husband. Yeah.
Well, no, it's not a true story. It was just for her to write it. And, no, she wrote it and directed it and she starred in it. But it must have been inspired. Right. But it must have been inspired by something, someone that she knew or something like that. But no, she's it was just a very powerful film. And I don't normally get that connected to a piece of work. But that one really, really spoke to me. And I think because I was there while it was being filmed and it was done at Christmas time was the setting. So there's that, holiday part to it. But it was a really beautiful thing. And all I can say is I hope that she does one day.
Well, the way you talked about it made me think it was a real life story that was put on the screen. So there you go.
There's
it
the
sounds
power.
Like an amazing work.
The power of entertainment. There you are.
Absolutely.
Well, so where can people find Set in Stone?
On Amazon, as I sell it as an ebook. Lily Lamb Set in Stone on Amazon Kindle.
Amazon Kindle. Yeah, Kindle's really a great place to read. And you had mentioned
Brilliant.
you mentioned the feeling of turning a page, like licking your finger and turning that page. And I miss sitting on the couch and doing nothing but having my coffee on the table, maybe a snack, and just spending the whole day reading a book that I was just immersed in.
Yeah.
I miss that.
Go on, sorry.
Oh no, that's it. That's all I was going to say. Yeah.
Yeah, one day I hope to make enough money to release my books as paperback, but until then they'll just stay as ebooks.
Yeah. Well, there is the environmental factor to consider. But at the same point, I'm like, I kind of like having a book in my hand. I'm really torn between the two because I see the advantages of both.
I do too, believe me, because I've got a terrible eyesight problem. I can't really read paperbacks now.
Oh.
And I have to, read it in daylight and then have to bring the book close to myself, etc. So when I read it on my tablet, I can enlarge the font to the maximum, like one word a page.
Well, yeah, there's that. But don't they have magnifiers for books now?
Yeah, it's okay. I may be a nice person, but I'm also a bit shallow. I'm the other version of shallow hell. I'm struggling to bring that magnifying glass in front of me at a cafe.
Well, it doesn't look like it's comfortable yet. It looks like it's a really good idea that they still need to develop a little bit more.
I know. So I've got my glasses, and when you look at me through my glasses, my eyes look a bit large. So I think I'll leave the magnifying glass and keep it at home.
There you go. Well, Lily, I wish you the greatest success with this book. I'm excited that you're out there telling stories the way that you do. I love that they're organic. I love that they grow the way they grow. I think that's some of the best kind of writing out there. So check out Set in Stone. Follow Lily and see when her new book comes out after my song at some point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you take care of yourself and please keep writing, keep following that passion. And thank you for being one of those people that spends your life helping make people's lives better as best you can.
And thank you for being so wonderful and keep creating music. There are many who appreciate your work on a very personal basis.
Well, thank you. That means the absolute world to me. Please come back and see us again.
Absolutely, sir. You call me, I'll be there.
Oh, excellent. All right. Well, you take care, Lily. We'll talk soon.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I just love this lady's attitude and her outlook and her approach on life and how that carries over to her writing. Very, very interesting stuff. And I hope to find some time at some point to read her work. As you all know, I don't really make a lot of time to sit and read because I've got a lot of things going on. Audiobooks, I'm a big fan of. And, if you've got an audiobook that you would like me to listen to, send it my way or send me the title and I'll see what I can do to get to it. Thank you guys so much for joining me on another episode of the HaskinCast Podcast. I will be back next week with another episode of the HaskinCast Podcast. Please remember to like, rate, share on whatever device that you choose to listen to the podcast on. See you guys next week. Cheers.